good evening to everybody. Today we are going to talk about how to improve performance across the paper supply chain with the help of the OPHAL guide. Like Ingi said, optimized paper handling and logistics guide. Next slide, Nigel, please. Yes, when we prepared the OPHAL guide, our vision was that with collaboration across the supply chain allows resources and skills to be shared to improve the operational performance, irrespective of which sprint process is used. All links of the chain naturally must be optimized, and this is possible when all parties involved work together. The project group worked with about 30 companies, all involved in the logistic chain. The goal was to come up with updated guide and information covering the needs and best practices in the whole chain. As you can see from the list of companies here, all logistic chain players from paper production to end users are represented. Printing and wrapping paper producers, pallet producers, insurance company, transportation experts, customers, and many others. And at the foot of this slide, there are also logos of the founder organization to this project: ERA, European Rotogravure Association, IDEA Alliance from North America, Nordic Offset Printers Association, ICM Print Best Practice Group, and of course, WAN-IFRA. The project group solution to the optimizing challenge is clear. As a result of the excellent cooperation in the group, we now have up-to-date, easy-to-use best practice guide. The OPHAL guide is single cross-industry process reference for the entire supply chain. The guide offers tools to work with the challenges we have today in the chain, such as reducing resources across the industry, declining availability of skills, but at the same time, it also offers lean and green improvements opportunities. And as said, the logistic chain techniques used are the same for all printing processes. The guide is structured into 11 modules, each covering a special area of the techniques and operations in the chain. Our experts today will give you an overview of selected modules. But before we go into details, we may want to ask ourselves, why optimize paper handling? Print quality and productivity requires paper to be in excellent conditions, of course. However, many things can happen to it across the logistic chain, from its wrapping at the paper mill to entering the first printing unit. While you may think this photo from Paris in the 1930s is an exaggeration, the fact is that in many parts of the world, similar practices are still used today. Paper may not always be fit to print. This project was initiated because paper damage remains an important factor even in Europe and North America, in spite of the sophisticated techniques used in these regions. The table in the bottom right corner clearly shows how big role damages play and how much additional waste the damages create, increasing the printer's total waste percentage quite a lot. So, paper is not a simple cargo, it's heavy, valuable, and fragile. It will quickly degrade from excessive moisture, waters, and blows. And of course, paper is also the dominant print cost and climate footprint source. Causes are risks within an inherently complex supply chain. This process chart, which we will come back actually later, identifies the path that paper takes from when it's wrapped at the mill until it enters the first printing unit. A risk of damage occurs every time it's lifted, lowered, moved, or stored. All this is true even if the supplying mill is next to the printing plant. So it is obvious that to optimize operations by using best practices is very, very important. And one might say now that the OPHAL guide is like a Swiss Army knife, a multi-purpose tool for multiple uses and users. It helps troubleshooting, implementing best practices for supervisors with their staff, training new hires, and provides a common language and vision across the supply chain. As you know, best practice is doing it right first time by systematic use of procedures and techniques to optimize an action or process. So with this background, we are going to share our tool with you with four short presentations. Today's speakers participated in the elaboration of this collaborative cross-industry guide and are all members of the OPHAL Management Board. In addition to the presentations, like Ingi said, we will share some new innovations with WPF at the end of the webinar. So I think we are ready for the presentations now. And I will introduce the speakers as they come. And the first one is with the topic of evaluation and warehouse, Martin Gerke. Martin is the Vice President Technical Sales at Stora Enso and is responsible for the Global Technical Customer Service team in the paper division and also the Print and Paper Academy programs. Martin speaks today from UK. Please, Martin.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and yeah, welcome from rainy London today. I will talk about two of the modules and pick some important topics out of it. But of course, we have a huge range of information in those guides, so we can only highlight certain aspects and need to dive into it into more detail with more specific modules, of course. Why evaluation and warehousing? Yeah, evaluation and inspection is a key element of finding out what is good. And warehousing, as Eric has shown in this chart, supply chain for paper products to the printing plants is often complex. In the minimum, you have two warehouses, one at the paper mill after production, and of course, one at the printing houses. But in many cases, you have 2, 3, 4, 6 warehouses in between, and to have good operations in those ones is absolutely critical. Even, of course, no one likes working capital and wants to keep volumes down. Next slide, please. Starting with inspection and evaluation. It seems so obvious, but it's not. And why is it so critical to have good procedures in place? The most important one is really, as a user, I have enough paper really fit for purpose. Nowadays, we have less and less standardized products, even in newsprint. Every production is pretty bespoke, made often to order. And if then material is lost on the way from the original production to the end use, then it might not be enough paper, and you might not be able to finish the print job as originally planned. The second point, pretty important as well, printing machines, converting machines have to run as efficient as possible and without any disruptions. And damages to material are often a root cause for disruptions in production processes. The third point, very important, is of course safety, and we come back to that topic a couple of times during our sessions. Only really undamaged material and material which has not been contaminated, but which way ever can be really handled in a safe way and not cause any harm to people or to equipment. And only when you do proper inspection and evaluation, you know really the root cause why something happened in the first place. Without those investigations, you can't improve and avoid that something similar happens again. And last but not least, someone needs to be responsible and put in charge. And we have complex supply chains with many different stakeholders, and it's pretty important to identify where something might go wrong. Next slide, please. So what are the key elements? Of course, you have the goods, which needs to be inspected, but you have much more than that. You have, of course, the warehousing itself, the operations set up there, the layout, how the stacking is done, and how goods are really handled in there. We have the transport units, and Martin will talk much more about that in his slot. We have handling equipment, and Mike has the pleasure to highlight certain aspects on those ones. So for everything, you need proper procedures so that you can really evaluate where something happened, what has happened, how bad is the damage, what next, what are the action points? Do I need replacement paper? Can I repair something? Do I have to ship something back to the origin? Or can I still use it at all? Or do I have to find alternative materials? All those questions are answered, or systems can be found, of course, then in the module. The second part is warehousing, and I've picked here two events or two topics, if you want. This is safety, and the second one is housekeeping. But first, of course, having an always safe environment is absolutely crucial, not only for the personnel, but it helps as well, to have no accidents at all, and good procedures and safe ways to work help as well to have no damages. Specific topic is fire safety, which is highlighted in the modules, but again, Nigel will talk about that later on. There's new developments happening at the same time, so the guides continue to develop and evolve. Here on the right-hand side in the pictures, you can see, for example, new devices for anti-collision, which is warning, for example, clam truck drivers or other people with equipment driving around if there's personnel walking around. And digitalization is a big topic, and new solutions are coming on the market. And we try to inform everyone in the supply chain about those opportunities. By that, I would say, come to the next point, the cleanliness. Again, pretty obvious, but it's not working all the time. Otherwise, we would not talk about that topic. So having no debris on the floor is pretty important, how to keep that out, or as you move with vehicles into warehouses and out, how do you have certain procedures to keep it all the time clean? And if you spot something, that it is corrected immediately. Birds and rodents are a big topic, so no contamination happens to the products. Product safety becomes more and more important, so you have to follow more and more complex industry standards, especially for food packaging and hygiene products. And of course, cross-contamination with other products is a big issue. So paper products should be really warehoused only in dedicated warehouse for paper and similar compatible products, so that we don't have any risk of odor or stains causing problems to the, as Eric said, very valuable material, and it can be forwarded to the right end use. So, and as a summary in a nutshell, having clear procedures, following best practice will help you and your operations to be safe, to be competitive, and have everything fit for purpose. With that, back to Eric, please.
Eric, you're muted.
Yes, I am unmuted. Sorry, Mike. My problem. So Mike Elmore is the next speaker, and he covers the module of roll handling equipment. Mike is Global Product Manager for Cascade Corporation, and he is responsible for paper roll clamps, damage reduction products, rotating products, and sensor fork technologies. Mike really has an extensive experience associated with the pulp and paper industry, including the Capstone Paper and Packaging Corporation. So good morning, Mike, to Portland, Oregon.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning, good day, everyone. The OPHAL guide is created and set up to help train and guide by setting standards across the entire supply chain. As Eric mentioned, it's sort of the Swiss Army knife, where all the modules are interrelated. So today I'll be reviewing modules 4 and modules 5. In modules 4, we look at how to select the correct paper roll handling equipment. And that's because paper is a dominant cost of printing, but also the risk of damage occurs each time the paper is handled. That is, each time it's touched, whether it's lifted, lowered, moved, and or stored. So module 5 is divided into 4 sections: covering materials handling equipment, roll clamps, clamping, and forklift trucks. So in the next slide, we see that selection and maintenance of handling equipment is essential to damage-free paper roll handling. And that's because throughout its logistics supply chain, paper may be handled up to 16 times. As we mentioned previously, each time it's touched or handled, there's the risk of damage. And in addition, paper can be difficult to handle and be prone to damage due to its size, dimensions, configuration, and weight. Lift trucks are the most common handling method for paper and paper-related materials. And lift trucks and clamping attachments need to be selected collectively to meet specific handling requirements. That is, the roll handling equipment needs to be looked at as a complete system. And on the right side of this slide, you can see that we've listed some of the typical tasks that need to be considered when selecting the proper equipment, as well as the typical types of clamp trucks. So let's talk in the next slide a little bit more about paper. Selecting the correct clamp is a key factor in operating efficiency and avoiding damage. The equipment needs to suit the properties of the paper being handled, its operational parameters, and the transport methods. And those parameters include the paper properties such as the density, weight, dimensions, packaging, the roll sizes, the paper grade and type, the wrapper type, whether it's wrapped or not, and the type, if multiple rolls are wrapped together or singly, the storage requirements, including stacking and how high the rolls are stacked, operational locations, such as if the material is stored in one location, moved to another staging site, and then moved to the use location, as well as the need to handle rail, road, and maritime transport needs. So in the next slide, we go a little bit deeper. We learned in Module 4 that paper roll clamp arm configuration is a major consideration when selecting the proper handling equipment. And that's because there is such a wide range of parameters as we've outlined in the previous slide. The arm geometry and layout needs to suit the tasks expected, but also take into account the material being handled. There are a variety of types of layouts and attachments to accomplish this, including non-rotating single roll clamps, non-rotating multiple roll clamps, short and long arm paper roll clamps, and oops, we kind of bounced. If we could go back a slide, please. And fixed or split arm paper roll clamps. So in Module 4, in the next slide, we actually go a little deeper, and we learn that there are 6 interrelated factors that affect how a clamp picks up a roll. These include hydraulic pressure, clamp force, contact pad surface pressure, friction handling and clamp setup, dynamic forces, outside forces that impact the handling system, and the clamping factor. In Module 4, we even go deeper and list the fundamental steps to ensure that the clamp applies the correct clamp and force, and those are establishing the initial hydraulic pressure, verifying that the hydraulic pressure is adequate, and fine-tuning that pressure as needed, as well as performing daily checks. Now, numbers in the list of 6, there are 2 that are critical or more important. They're very important and related to this slide, and that is the clamp force and clamping factor. And that is because in the next slide, we see that using the correct contact pad is key to damage-free handling. We already discussed that choosing the right paper roll clamp for the application is important, but selecting the correct contact pads is a crucial part of that effort. And that's because the correct contact pads optimize the clamp force, resulting in overall damage reduction. This is where the roll and attachment interface occurs. So it's very important to take into consideration the friction required between the pad and the roll so that the roll is held and doesn't slip, but also that the clamp force is adequate, not over-clamped and cause damage, and not under-clamped and result in the roll slipping. So we've talked about how to handle or how to select the proper equipment. Module 5 looks at best practices and techniques for correctly operating paper roll equipment. And that's because it's important, because the best equipment in the world and the best system, the attachment lift truck, really doesn't matter if it's not used properly and correctly. So module 5 is divided into 5 sections: working safety before starting your shift, handling fundamentals, loading and unloading, and even pallet handling. And one of the areas in the next slide that is key is working safely. Working safely with proper paper roll handling techniques is essential to avoiding risk of injury and also to preventing roll damage. It's important to understand all of the operating procedures and safety precautions of the lift truck and the attachment combination. We discussed previously that it needs to be considered as a system. So the best practice operation and well-maintained equipment is essential. And module 5 goes deeper. And in this slide, you can see in the lower left-hand corner there's an example of some of the specific keys that are asked or are discussed. Another area that is discussed in module 5 are some of the daily checks at each shift change. And these include checking the equipment condition, the clamping arms, checking the contacts, pads, and surfaces, checking the frame, the hydraulics and hoses, checking the mounting, looking for oil leaks and listening for air leaks. And we even have a pre-lift check, sort of a walk-around quick check for operators where they're advised to check the pad conditions, ensure that the safety stickers and nameplate are present and legible, a quick check of the cylinders and hoses for leaks, as well as look at the lower hook and upper hook for proper and firm engagement, as well as ensuring that the fasteners are present and secure. And we even have do's and don'ts in module 5, an example of which is in the lower left-hand corner regarding a cold system startup. In that case, the system, if it is cold, there's a risk that the correct clamp force may not be applied and immediately, and the correct clamp force immediately obtained, and the load can be dropped. So we have a series of do's and don'ts throughout module 5 that operators can use. And that's because in the final slide, we list out the proper paper roll handling techniques that they depend on. And those include the type or grade of paper, the paper roll size, the type of clamp, the clamp arm layout, whether the rolls are handled in the horizontal, vertical, or both, whether the handling system, the truck and the clamp, are used for loading truck trailers and containers, loading rail cars, or maritime loading. And so that's module 4 and 5. And that's important because each of the needs of these need to be considered for best practices and correct operating procedures. And so now we've learned we've reviewed how to select the proper equipment and the proper techniques and best practices. We're going to spend a little bit more time in the modules further talking about transport. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. I really liked your slide about checking the equipment before starting to work, because it's like the airline pilots, they go around the plane before they start flying. So it's very, very good point. Thanks. Now we go to paper product transportation issues. This will be presented by Martin Zorn. Martin is Director of Technical Customer Service, News and Retail at UPM Communication Papers. He leads the European team of technical service experts. He's an active member of the WAN-IFRA Newsprint and News Inc. committee, as well as the World Printer Forum Working Group. Martin speaks from Germany. So Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you all for listening in on our joint presentation. So next stop here is paper transport, and let's start with the first slide of this section. As you can imagine, it makes a difference if you as a printer have a local mill on your market which delivers the paper to you, or if the supplying mill for your printing job is coming from another continent far away. Not only in terms of lead times to get the paper to the printing locations, but also in terms of the kind of cargo carrier which is used. As you see on this slide, which you've seen before in the introduction by Eric, there might be several steps in the supply chain where reels are on the move. In this example here, it's 5 times the case, and each time the reels need to be lifted and loaded, and after their arrival, lifted and unloaded. So there are many additional times when handling damage can occur. Next slide, please, Nigel. The means of transportation or the type of transport vehicle which is used for transport can be very different. The goods could be transported on the roads and streets, on rails, or over the sea and oceans. On top of that, reels could be handled individually when loaded on a truck, a wagon train, or into a ship or vessel. So they are transported in bigger units over long distances in a container, for example. For each of these modes of transportation, we have a dedicated chapter in the guide, as the demands and challenges to handle the paper reel and pallet in the right way to prevent damages are special in each case. From our perspective, the OPHAL handbook's content is not only interesting knowledge for printers, publishers, merchants, and other users of paper, but also for logistical companies and handling facilities who are looking for special know-how and information on paper handling and transportation. Next slide, please. The direction and the level of force impacts can be very different. It's depending on how paper is transported. On this graph, the container is used as an example because the container can be transported by truck, train, or ship. The stresses during the transport could be single, repeatedly, or continuously, and they vary from truck to train to ship. And within ships, it's also depending on the roughness of the sea they are traveling on. In the table on the right-hand bottom of the slide, you can see an overview of different maximum forces, depending if the vessel travels on the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, or an example on one of the other 7 seas. Next slide, please. One back, yeah, thanks. In the chapter on rail transport, you can find good information about the different wagon types used for it. These vary as well as even rail tracks do, which can be different on the continents and sometimes even in neighboring countries. Finland and Russia, as an example, have one track size and then the rest of Europe another one. There's also a lot of best practice information in this chapter, for instance, on loading and unloading procedures for wagons, which can be a challenge for the clamp truck driver. As with all transport vehicles, the securing of reels and pallets is very important, not only in terms of damage, but also to prevent serious accidents in the delivery, which could endanger lives. So on this slide here, you see good and not so good examples of securing paper reels. Next, please. Maritime transport also got a known chapter in the guide. There are different types of vessels. Some are very specialized to transport paper, and others are used for all kinds of commodities. Some ships are loaded with a crane from the top with singular units or with containers. Others are loaded from the side or from the back and front. And as time is money, the loading and unloading process needs to be quick and efficient. So we describe the challenges for each type of vessel and the techniques which are used in handling. Ships are usually transporting large paper quantities. Yeah, that container, that's right. And paper vessels operate regularly on their routes. For very long distances, containers are used. And for this, we have also a known chapter in the guide. Containers are standard units to transport all kinds of goods. And as the handler at a port doesn't know what the container contains as content, securing is very important here as well. As you would expect, climate conditions can be rough and extreme on sea. The usual transport device, however, is the truck. That brings us to the next slide. Yes, thanks. That's why a long chapter with a lot of valid information about the road transport is part of the handbook. When transporting paper by truck, many things can represent challenges. So keeping trailers clean and in good shape is a key requisite. We heard that from Martin as well in terms of or in respect of the warehousing. Since your co-worker in a printing plant is the person to see a reel or pallet when it is delivered, it is very important that he or she checks the goods on arrival, as you have heard in Martin's presentations as well. In the book, you see good and bad examples in this respect. So here are some examples on the slide. That brings us to the next slide. Logistic means to bring goods just in time and in good condition from point A to B. The maximum payload of a truck should be used on transport for efficiency reasons, But with certain reel sizes and reel dimensions or with smaller orders, this can be difficult. The handbook shows loading patterns to find maximized truck loads or best ways to place reels and pallets on a trailer. By this, reels can be placed in a way that the transport takes place with a maximum of safety too. Next slide, please. Yeah, as also already said, the securing of reels and pallets is very important. There are different legal standards and regulations in place, and securing can also be overdone and cause damages. Also here in the handbook, you find best practices on this as well, and typical transport damage types, which you could spot when unloading the trailers. And then the last slide. Finally, working safely is the most important thing in the supply chain. We want that everyone who works with paper reels or pallets or with printed goods stays safe and healthy. This starts already at our production sites, the paper mills, but it's also as important throughout the whole supply chain. And yes, with these words, I hand back to you, Eric, again.
Thank you, Martin. So I think we are now ready with good, properly handled, properly transferred goods. We are ready to go to press. And this we will do with Nigel Wells. Nigel is associate of the Ecograph Consultancy, leader of 20 international cross-industry projects for Web Offset Champion Group, Print City, ICM Print, and OPHAL, of course. As you can hear maybe from his dialect, he spent 20 years in the Australian print industry because he's an Australian, and later in business development for a division of Mann Rowland and Mectec. He's the managing editor of OPHAL, and he speaks from Paris, France. Please, Nigel.
Thank you, Eric. So let's start off with a picture that everybody dreads, which is a web break. And this is part of the task that we set ourselves within OPHAL, which was, well, how can we minimize web breaks and other damage, avoidable paper damage, by best practices? Now, we're going to share some of those best practices this afternoon. For those of you who are printers, you will know most of them. But more importantly here, it is often the people who are handling paper and particularly preparing paper rolls for pasting often have no formal education. And within the guide, we've prepared a briefing for how those people can work efficiently. So, paper onto press. We're going to concentrate on the roll processing system, but before we go any further, every one of the modules has got a safety notice, and this safety notice brings to your attention, I hope, if you read it, that it is the safety data instructions for the equipment that you have that always takes precedence over anything that we may say. That's absolutely essential. The other thing is that you'll see each time the symbols for key issues that we try to use as a way of isolating those points which are really important for you to follow. So let's start off with the fundamental paper conditions and logistics for printers. As we've heard earlier from Martin and Mike, we can help avoid web breaks and waste if we're looking after our handling and storage environments. Now, this is particularly important for the paper store and the press room. It goes even further than intermediate storage. And this is where stable temperature and humidity conditions have an important impact on the runnability of paper. And often we can get caught short when there's a sudden change in the weather. Particularly, I'm thinking of thunderstorms in the summer, which can really change the humidity in a dramatic fashion. If you look on this chart, we've identified the relationships between problems with paper and when the temperature change or when the humidity goes up and down. And another little point which is important is to control drafts from open external doors. because they not only cause unstable internal environment, but they also move dust around, which isn't a very good thing to have on your sensors. And as an example of that, the increased risk of dimensional instability you can see on the illustration on the right. Now the blue line was actually drawn, it's a straight line which was drawn, and then the roll was unwrapped and left standing for about 40 minutes. And you can see that the blue line is now bent as the outer spires have expanded. So you can have all sorts of problems coming from this, including if you've pre-prepared splices that they burst or they're substantially weakened and break as they're going through the press. Before we go into road processing efficiency, what's important to understand is what are the definitions between a missed splice, a failed splice, a burst, or a web break. Because if we really want to, if we have these things occur, we need to know where to look in order to be able to fix them. We come back to the root cause analysis that Martin discussed earlier. And here on this chart is about 30 causes of typical problems that we can get in those areas. So we try wherever we can to structure information in a way which is very quick for you to use to find solutions to your specific problems. Now, role changing success is a combination of two things, essentially, equipment and adequate consumables. I should also have added a third one, which is people, but we'll come to that as we go through. In terms of equipment, probably the outstanding point here, apart from maintenance, is web tension. The red line that you see here is a typical tension profile of a press, and in the center, it's a typical splice profile. And as the splice begins, the cycle begins, the tension declines as the arms are rotated to bring the roll into position. Then there is a sudden spike at the point of the splice, a decline as the arms are rotated to unload, and then we're back into a steady state, we hope. Now, normally we define a successful splice as one that's exited from the folder, but you can also probably include in a related splice break, web break, the whole 1 minute, which is the average time for the splice cycle. If we move to consumables now, this is the key interface, just as Mike discussed about handling rolls in forklift trucks and clamp trucks. Here we have two areas where the paper roll comes into contact with the splicer. Firstly, the core. Now, core qualities these days, generally it will cause no problems. Why is the core important? It's particularly so because if you have to make an emergency stop, the core has to stay in place and hold the paper together in order to be able to stop the press effectively. So this is much less of a problem now than what it was 20 or 30 years ago. The other big point is there's a much simpler splicing preparation now than there was previously. We now only use or mostly use straight line splices instead of very complicated B and W patterns. And the single all-in-one tape replaces the multiple elements that are shown here. So it's much simpler for the operator to prepare that. One of the small things to keep in mind is always to make sure that the tail length is short. Long flapping tails are pretty well a guarantee for a web break. Let's look at just a few best practices which we consider to be particularly important. Firstly, inspect the roll end shields before removing them, because if you've got a piece of grit or a stone that the roll has been sitting on, it's quite likely penetrated the roll end and dug into the paper. And if that's the case, it's going to be a probable cause of a web break. So you put that roll aside and move on, put something else in place, and we can deal with the damage later. The other really important thing is, if we can, it's always best to prepare the roll on the splicer. If you look at this photograph, one of the reasons is really obvious. This guy is relaxed. He's in a good position to work. And the other thing is that it ensures that you only remove the wrapper after loading. Again, much less waste. And the slab off waste is much easier to do, and to do it with care. And that's also a way of reducing waste. One of the tricks after preparing a splice tape, particularly if you're in difficult environments, is actually to rotate the roll so that the open splice tape is underneath the roll and no moisture or dust can settle on it, which would reduce its efficiency. And of course, we come back to housekeeping again: dry, clean, and closed doors. Slab off waste. Well, slab off waste is one of the biggest avoidable causes of paper waste, particularly because if you look at this chart, it's quite clear that the outer spires have got much more paper on it than the inner spires. So if you stripped off 5 millimeters of paper, it's probably about 2% of the whole roll. So it's a big impact area here for both the environmental and the economic costs of paper. To conclude the printing section, let's come back to the circular economy, which particularly in the newspaper industry, we're all part of, because what we're printing on was yesterday's newspapers. So as in the press room, what's really important here is to separate white waste from printed waste, from brown waste. This is a way that we can optimize their recycling. And if we weigh each of these wastes, it's a very good monitoring of how successful we are in managing paper as a source. As a resource, I should say. So we'll move to closing slides now. I wanted to get back at Eric. He had a photograph of Paris in the 1930s, and this is Berlin in 1919. Now, the legend that the guy on the left is from UPM and the guy from Stora Enso is on the right is unfounded. But that's not important. What's interesting here is the way these rolls are wrapped. They're wrapped with planks of wood and steel straps to hold them in place. So I think we've made a little bit of progress in terms of logistics since then. The point is, what they were trying to do was to protect the value of paper. And if we really want to optimize paper, maybe we should define its value first. Is it worthwhile optimizing? And how do you define paper? Now, there are multiple ways that we can do this. The first is kind of interesting. It's a perception comparison. This is great for clamp truck drivers. Trying to explain to them the price per ton and whatever else gets a bit complicated. But if you say, well, handling a paper roll is a little bit like handling a high definition television, and it's about the same price and it's almost as fragile, you probably will be able to communicate better with them. Or we can look at economic elements in price per ton, environmental in kilograms of carbon footprint. If we combine the two, they become a lean and green indicator. Or we can look at paper as a percentage of the total cost. And here it's a pretty big one, 50% plus. So these are ways that we can think about how we're going to express a value of paper. And this is where we're going to come to a poll. So it's about time where you can do a little bit of interaction here. You will see that measuring the right things and communicating to people in the manner to encourage corrective action is nothing new. This phrase was written 30 years ago by Roger Dickinson on War on Waste. So what we would like to do today is to ask you to share with us which of these 4 paper measurements you use. So we have 1 minute to do this. You'll see there's a little interaction screen that you can answer in yes or no to each of these questions, and then we're going to share the results of those with you. So firstly, we have total paper used as against total waste. This is a total material yield It's a headline number. It's really interesting. It's what goes into the plant in paper and what goes out as waste. It's a pretty interesting figure to have. Wet break frequency, which I'm sure that pretty well all of you are aware of. And then the other one is what we've been talking about today. Do you measure paper handling and storage damage as a percentage of your total consumption? Finally, we can come into an interesting point is, do you benchmark your data with other sites? How well are you doing in comparison with your peers? So this is where benchmarking is really interesting if you've got some standardized performance indicators. Now, I realize I'm at a disadvantage because on my screen, I can't see any of the answers that are coming through. So we need somebody, perhaps Eric, if you can see the numbers that are coming through, to comment on them, please.
I have no information on my screen at the moment, only your slide. So,
okay, then we'll come back to that with Ingi a little bit later. On. Now, that actually concludes our presentation today. This part of it, and we wanted to conclude with 5 steps to optimize your paper handling. What actions can you actually take? Well, the first one is fairly easy. You download the free book. It's a free ebook, or if you want, I don't know if you can see this, there is a printed version. It's absolutely excellent. That's available from the WAN-IFRA site and the OPHAL site if you would like it. You should share the ebook with your colleagues, or better still, get them to download their version. Identify the areas for action in your plan. Use some key performance indicators to monitor improvements. And then lastly, to enroll in our upcoming best practice webinars. Now, all of this good information is available on our website, which is here. And our parting message is collaborative best practices improve performance. And that's not just between suppliers, but it's between everybody in the printing plant and the supply chain. So now, Ingi, if you're prepared, would you like to share and take over and tell us about some breaking news, please?
Yes, what everybody has been waiting for. Thank you guys for a great presentation. Very well done. I agree with Nigel. It's been a really good cooperation between the World Printers Forum and the OPHAL group. And it's very important to see the specialists from the suppliers and specialists from the field sort of to work together. And we really want to enhance that and make that stronger. So therefore, we're very happy to announce that the OPHAL group will be, or OPHAL will become an WPF, or World Printers Forum Competence Center from now on. And we expect a great and continuing cooperation with the group. And as mentioned before, there are webinars coming up, technical webinars. So please stay tuned and watch what's coming. Nigel, over to you again. Congratulations again.
Well, thank you, Ingi. We should also point out that OPHAL looks at all printing processes, including heat set, cold set, gravure, digital, and sheet fed, and we'll continue to do that because this is really in the interests of everyone. So we will be very happy to be a competence center for all of these applications. And we're going to be looking at adding various items onto our website, which is actually hosted for us right from the beginning by WAN-IFRA. So we're very thankful for that and appreciate the support that has always been shown to us. So now the conclusion is time for your questions, and we have a little bit of time, I think, Eric, in which we might be able to answer a few of them. So over to you.
Yeah, should we have the poll question slide, because we have now some answers, quite interesting. We might want to read them now. So the first question, these are the final results from the jury. Hold on. I have just, they are coming in as we speak. I don't have the first question. Where is it? Well, the one I have, it might change a little bit. 89% say yes to the first question. The second question, 96 say yes. Third question, 81 say yes. And the fourth question, 80% say yes.
Okay. Well,
So this is the result of the international jury.
Very interesting. Thanks, Eric. And that's really very reassuring to see that over 80% of you are measuring things effectively. So we can see what else we can do in that area. Eric, are there any questions that you would like to pose?
I don't, I see nothing here. Only see the poll slide at the moment. Okay. So I think we should get rid of this poll slide. How do I do that?
Yeah.
I'll do that.
You have to go to on air.
There we go. So
I have still nothing here. What do I have to do, Martin?
Yeah, but I can take them if you want.
Yeah, please.
There's a couple of questions coming. And one very specific here, for example, is how to reject out of round reels before use at the press in peak production to avoid surprises or web breaks. And a similar one, maybe both to Mike, what are the measures how to reduce out of shape reels? Mike, do you want to comment on those?
Of course. So as far as measuring out of shape reels, there are means, there is equipment that can be used. I think we described that in one of the modules in the guide on determining the roundness of a reel or a roll. So there are means to do that, and probably the single biggest way to handle that is to prevent them in the first place. And so that's why we spend a great deal of time discussing proper handling, how to set the proper clamp and attachment forces so that the necessary clamp force is applied so that the roll doesn't become over compressed, core crushed, and maybe the roll become out of round. And there was a second question, Martin, that you mentioned.
Yes, how to avoid out of round, but you answered that question more or less.
Oh.
And if you adjust the clamp pressure, and,
Yes.
and I would add most suppliers, they add the clamp pressure on the label. So yes, the material from the outside, you can't see if it's a soft or a hard reel, but you need to check the label and see what type of clamp pressure needs to be applied.
Yes. And in the guide, we
Thanks,
have a
Mike.
listing of all those types of papers and their appropriate clamp force too for the various grades.
Good. Yeah, we have another question here. More than 0.5% of all newsprint paid for by the customer is wrapper waste. Is there an alternative to increase the yield per ton by reducing the weight of the wrapper? I'm happy to start that, but maybe Martin, you can comment on it. And of course, the wrapper has a function to protect the valuable paper inside. So depending on the destination and the delivery mode, you have to apply enough wrapper to ensure that the paper below is not damaged. So it is pretty risky to reduce the amount of wrapper because in general, that leads to higher damages. So we as a paper supplier always try to optimize that, of course, go by with the minimum wrapping. But I would say the amounts used nowadays are really difficult to reduce further. Martin, any comments from your side?
I can agree with your comments, and then I think we have to take into account as well that the wrapper is not only to safeguard regarding handling damages, it's also humidity and water protection. So from that point of view, you need proper wrapping around your reel to safeguard that no water damages are occurring during the transport, and especially the longer the transport chain is, and the more often the reel has to be handled, I think the more important it is as well to have enough wrappings and packaging around your reel to make it safe. But as you said,
out of time, guys.
Paper supplier looks at reducing possibilities, but the most important topic is to bring the reel safe to the end user.
I just want to mention all questions that have been asked in the questions column in the event here will be answered by the group, and we will send the replies to every participant in this group, in this event, I mean. So no questions will be unanswered, just to take care of that. Because we only have 2 minutes left. I would really like to thank the group again for this great webinar. I mean, it has been a great effort. I know they have spent quite a lot of time on it, and their knowledge is invaluable for us as a community. And I'll really much look forward to their upcoming webinars, because you see how insightful they are and their knowledge is. We have a session starting at 4 o'clock about pre-press. Please stay tuned. And also don't forget to visit our sponsors. They are so happy to see you, and they all look forward to meet you. So I thank you all for today, and thanks guys for being with us, and you will all get your answers shortly in an email. Thank you for today, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.